So we've got the UAW strike, and this is pretty big. But before we get into the bad news, let's get into the really good news. And Ford is doing great throughout this strike. Stock price went up today, and I think that Jim Farley, in my opinion, Jim Farley is negotiating in very much a classy manner and in a manner that demonstrates that he's thinking about the survivability and the profitability of the business, but also about what's fair and feasible. And, he's not just forgetting the little guy. He's not forgetting the middle class. So Canadian Ford workers actually ratified a new agreement with Ford. So the UAW, I think, isn't thrilled. They're not. I don't think they'd say that Ford is perfect in these negotiations because they're not getting everything they want immediately. We are, what is it, day 10 or rough day 10? We're into week 2 of a strike. Ford's been hit less hard by these new measures. I think Ford's negotiating in more than just good faith. I think they're trying to be very reasonable. And that's smart because most Americans, in a poll, most Americans, and I'll get to the slide for that, most Americans actually agree with this strike. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But the Canadian workers have worked the deal out. Actually, let's try to get to that slide. These are, for some reason, no matter how I order these, they always get mixed up in the order, but I want to just show you the poll. But the statistic is 75% of people who were polled in the US agree with the strike. So you'll have to take my word on it. We'll try to get to the slide after.
Johnny and the technology.
Johnny and the technology. So we've got fantastic article. Brett Foote, fantastic when it comes to information in regards. He works for Ford Authority and is a fantastic reporter. So he's writing about the Canadian Ford workers how they ratified a new agreement. So if you prefer to also read and get, background and make sure what I'm saying is actually truthful, it's all from here. It's cited. So there is progress when it comes to the United Auto Workers. There's progress when it comes to negotiations with Ford. There's not enough progress when it comes to Jeep and Stellantis. So I'm even starting to wonder if the strike could either completely end at Ford much earlier than Stellantis and GM.
Yeah, that's a good question to ask.
Or if they'll just make sure that the pain is very low for Ford, which they have already done. But there's a tentative agreement on the table for the Canadian Union, Unifor, just this last week. And this is going to go through here, folks. So what's going on here? So 54% of the 5,600 total Unifor members voted in favor of a new 3-year contract, which contains a large array of benefits for those workers, including a 15% increase in general wages over the life of the agreement. So over 3 years, they're getting 15%. So 5% per year. And Brett Foote from Ford Authority went on to say that there's a $10,000 ratification bonus for full-time permanent employees and $4,000 for temporary employees. Increases for the retirement program, including a raised pension benefit rate and increased contributions, and a 50% reduction in the new higher wage progression period. So a big issue. And I've got to say, I'm proud of what's been done here because I think there's been this practice with corporations to have these temporary workers, and the pay is awful. It's, you can have, let's say, at the United Auto Workers over in the US, you have a lot of non-permanent, you could say full benefit employees working crazy hours, but for $17 to $19 an hour. Remember, these factories are a lot of these factories are in big cities where the cost of living is 5, 6, 7, 8 times higher than what it is if you live out in the country. If you live out in the country, a $100,000 home or $130,000 home might come with 10 acres. And if you're in the city, it might be the equivalent of having a $600,000 or $800,000 mortgage out in the country, which would be, you know, a mega mansion out in the country, but in the
With
city,
no land.
yeah, with no land, and you're just living in a one bedroom in, you know, downtown Detroit. So the cost of living in cities is very high. $17 to $19 an hour just
Not that
doesn't
much.
cut it. So they're forced, whether, you know, and of course these manufacturers need people, certain people to work a lot of hours, but these people are forced to work insane hours, miss out having families, or if they have families, miss out on seeing their families in order to make ends meet. You know, an F-150 now is basically starting at $1,000 a month to have an F-150. So a big point that the UAW workers have been saying is, hey, we can't afford the product we make. And Henry Ford's original vision was that every worker would be able to afford the product they make. And it seems like Ford with Jim Farley, I think he's doing a great job, because, you know, the fact that he's the most inclined to give more into the demands of the UAW, I think he's more in tune with Henry Ford's original vision of having its workers being able to afford the actual product. And that means when you see the line here saying that the time period of being a temporary, you could kind of call them a temporary or non-permanent worker. They do that at, you know, the university I used to work at. It's very common in universities, instead of having a unionized, decently paid worker, you'd give them a 1-year contract. And that way, because it's a 1-year contract, it's almost shady and illegal. Like, there's a lot of pressure to, well, you're not unionized. If you want to get into the union and get a full-time position, well, you're going to have to work for it. So, you know, I used to work sometimes, I've worked 90 hours in a week. I still got paid for 32.5 hours. And that's why I stopped working for that university. I loved my job. I was helping to make a difference, helping shape minds and, you know, shape people who are going to bring us into the future, hopefully. For the good or the bad, I wanted to make sure that it was more likely for the good, and that I was, you know, teaching them important things like, you know, don't be evil, don't try to get away with crimes, and whatnot.
But here, I have an interesting comment from For High For Low. He said the cost of the higher wage gets passed on the consumers, so vehicles
Yes.
are already ridiculously priced. So if they
It is
raise
a big
them,
concern.
can we expect a raise on the pricing of the cars?
Absolutely,
Ouch.
because we can't expect corporations to say, you know, last year in 2022, GM made $10 billion of profit. $10 billion of profit. And unfortunately, we can't expect them to just be happy with $1 billion of profit. And in manufacturers did a lot of, you know, buyback of stock options. They had a lot of money. They spent money on things that, you know, they spent a lot of money. They invested heavily into EV. They did stock buyback options. And still, they made billions of dollars. But that's not always going to be around. A lot of money has to go towards EV. And there's a channel, I think it's called Charge EV, I was watching. And they're, you know, kind of saying that the CEO of GM is doing almost seems like they're implying that the CEO is doing kind of a horrible job because they're just going all in on EVs. Right now, with current laws and future laws coming into play, you have to go all EV, all in on EVs. Otherwise, you're going to get pushed out. You're going to be pushed out because you're going to go bankrupt, either paying fines to the government because your fleet average mile per gallon isn't high enough, or you're going to go bankrupt because you're going to give all your money buying carbon taxes, paying Tesla for carbon taxes, saying, oh, Tesla, we didn't make it this year. We're you know, our overall CO2 use, our miles per gallon on our overall fleet, all the models we sell, based on volumes. So high volume sellers like trucks really cause problems for these averages because trucks don't make they're not you going for 50 miles per gallon in your truck. You're getting anywhere from 20 to 30 miles per gallon, let's say, in your truck. So, or, based on the window stickers. So when they're miles per gallon on their trucks, and that being their main volume sales, well, your overall fleet average isn't that great. So what do? You have two options: give money to the government, or go, hey, Tesla, we didn't make it this year. We don't want to have to pay billions in fines. So here's $3 billion for carbon tax credits. And that's a problem made by politicians. That's a politically driven problem, and it makes Tesla have fake profits, be able to lower their profit, being able to lower the price of their vehicles, making it even harder for everyone else to compete. So if other manufacturers beyond Tesla, beyond all electric companies, if they don't play a whole lot of catch up real quick, they're going to lose out all their money, because they're going to be slowly paying for their own death. They're going to be paying towards their own death. They're going to be giving their competitor money, and that means there's less money to get into the EV game. So the EV game is a forced game by politicians, and you either get on or you close up shop, and it's just a question of, would it cause GM, if GM had zero electric vehicles? And same thing with Stellantis. Are they going bankrupt by 2030? Or is it going to be 2028, or is it going to be 2033? The one thing that's guaranteed is, based on current laws, they will go bankrupt. They'll end up giving all their money away to their competitor. So that's a major issue. Also, 5% pay increase per year. So I really want to point out, with these contract negotiations, some people get really upset, because they're like, how could the UAW not take the 20% that was offered? They were offered 20% price increases. How could they not take that? Well, remember, folks, it's over 4 years. And over 4 years, that means your increase is 5%. And if inflation is at 5% overall for those 4 years, well, your 20%, your salary didn't actually go up. It didn't go up at all. You didn't get a raise. You just matched inflation. And we all know food, houses, the cost of living, the price of essentially staying alive and staying sheltered has gone up by a lot more than 5% in the last years. So the UAW is just trying to play catch up. So we're going to be talking about that now. The challenge for manufacturers is they have to spend a ton of money for EVs. But they also, GM made $10 billion. So is there room to give workers, the middle class, a pay increase? Yes, absolutely. Will they still survive with a pay increase? Yes, absolutely. The question is, how much of a pay increase? So that's the real bargaining chip. That's the real crossroads here. Big manufacturers, CEOs want to give as little as possible, because their pay is based on performance. And how's that judged? Well, it's judged on the stock's price, how much the stock is worth. Which means, upper class people getting money for investing. So essentially doing nothing other than a little keyboard warrior of, I'm going to place, $100,000 or $1 million with Ford. If the stock goes up, they're happy, and the CEO gets, let's say the CEO of GM got a $29 million bonus last year. And it makes it really hard to cry wolf and say, look, we can't afford to give the workers more than 20% of a pay increase, when she received a 40% pay increase. But that's based on stock value. Now, if they give everything to the workers, two things are going to happen. One, it's going to be harder to be more competitive and have leftover money for your stockholders for EV development, which is forced and necessary because of carbon taxes. And it also means that you would think that pay at the end of the year is going to go down, because if the company's not as profitable, stock prices either don't go up as much or don't go up at all. And if you're the head of that company, as a CEO, you're paid based on performance. So less money. So this really, unfortunately, does break down a bit of a class war. So that's what's going on. Now, volume is still high. So Ford's CFO says that overall vehicle demand still remains high. I can tell you that no matter what you hear on YouTube, inventory at dealerships is high and can, let's say in F-150s or 1500s. This strike could last 2 months and then there wouldn't be any F-150s left over. So I'd say the capacity for manufacturers to have a strike go on is about 2 months. But Sean Fain has said no matter what, they're going to make it. And if they're going to, no matter how long the manufacturers hold out, they'll last 1 day more. So they've made it really clear. They're telling the manufacturers, give us a very good offer, very close to what we're asking. Otherwise, we're going to make this last as long as need be. And they've got the money for it. They've got, $825 million, meaning every single worker in the UAW, all 150,000 workers could be on strike for roughly, 2 months? They can handle about 2 months. The manufacturer's inventory levels can handle about 2 months, but remember, people can still order vehicles. So I think this is going to be a long, very long strike.
Yeah, because they have the strategy with them.